Yes.
We need some up here.
10 pages.
The statement is, that they're going to read is going to be 10 pages.
Okay, 2-minute warning.
2 minutes.